The alarm screamed through the Galactic Council monitoring station like a wounded animal crying for help. Lieutenant Kextel's forearms moved quickly across his control panel as the distress signal came through space from the mining colony of New Desha. His green skin turned pale as he read the broken message that appeared on his screen. Under attack, the words flashed in red letters. Civilians trapped came next, followed by requesting immediate assistance before the signal broke apart into static noise. Kextel's breathing became faster as he realized what this meant. Someone was attacking innocent people on New Desha and they needed help. Right now, he pressed the emergency button that would alert Admiral Zexton, the station commander. The Admiral was an Altarian, a species known for being careful and thinking about everything twice before making any decisions. When Admiral Zexton arrived at the communications center, his scales were perfectly arranged and his uniform was spotless as always. "What is the nature of this emergency, Lieutenant?" asked the Admiral in his calm voice that never seemed to change no matter what happened. "Sir, we have received a distress call from New Desha Colony. They report being under attack and request immediate military assistance," Kextel replied, his voice shaking with worry. Admiral Zexton looked at the screen and read the message carefully. His expression did not change as he considered the situation. "I see. We must follow proper protocol, Lieutenant. Begin filing the emergency assistance request forms. Schedule an emergency council meeting for 72 hours from now. Contact the Diplomatic Relations Department and have them prepare impact assessment reports. But sir, the colonists need help now." "People might be dying," Kextel said, his voice rising with panic. "Lieutenant, we cannot simply rush into unknown situations without proper planning and authorization. The Council has procedures for these matters. We must trust in the system," Admiral Zexton replied before walking back to his office. Meanwhile, 300 light-years away on a small monitoring post at the edge of human space, Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Chun was listening to the same distress signal. Unlike the Galactic Council station, this human outpost was small and cramped, with only 12 people working there. The coffee was always cold and the air recycler made strange noises, but the humans who worked there were always alert and ready for action. Sarah's brown eyes widened as she heard the desperate message from New Desha. She did not waste time filling out forms or scheduling meetings. Her fingers flew across her console as she opened a direct channel to the TNS Retribution, the flagship of Admiral Marcus Rodriguez and the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet. "Admiral Rodriguez, this is Lieutenant Chun at Outpost 7. We have intercepted a civilian distress call. Transmitting data now, sir." The response came back in seconds. Admiral Rodriguez's voice was rough and serious, like a man who had seen too many battles and lost too many friends. "Copy that, Lieutenant. How many civilians are we talking about?" "Sir, New Desha Colony has approximately 50,000 residents, according to our files. Mixed species population, mostly families and mining workers." "Understood. What's our current fleet status?" "Sir, we have 8 ships ready for immediate deployment. The Retribution, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 destroyers, and 2 supply ships. Full combat readiness can be achieved in 30 minutes. Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for exactly 3 seconds before his voice came back with the kind of determination that made humans famous across the galaxy. "All ships prepare for emergency deployment. Set course for New Desha at maximum burn. We launch in 20 minutes. "Sir, should we contact the Galactic Council for authorization?" asked his communications officer. "Negative. Authorization comes from people in danger asking for help. That's all the permission I need." "Move it, people." The human fleet began moving with the kind of speed that always surprised other species. While other races spent hours or days making decisions, humans simply acted. Within 20 minutes, 8 ships were accelerating toward New Desha at velocities that would have terrified most galactic citizens. Back at the Council monitoring station, Admiral Zexton was reviewing diplomatic protocols when his sensors detected the unusual energy signatures. His scales began to change color, turning darker as his body responded to an ancient fear that his species had carried for millions of years. These were the energy signatures of predator ships, ships built by a species that had evolved on a world so dangerous that survival required constant fighting. "Lieutenant Kextel, are you detecting these energy readings?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, sir. It appears to be a human fleet moving at high speed toward the new Thesha." System Admiral Zexton felt something cold move through his body. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, admitted only 5 years ago after lengthy debates about whether a species from a death world should be allowed to join civilized society. Most council members had assumed that humans would follow the same peaceful protocols as everyone else. They had been very wrong about that assumption. "Contact the council immediately. We have a diplomatic crisis developing," the admiral ordered, his scales now showing patterns of deep concern, while the bureaucrats prepared their emergency meetings and diplomatic protests. The human fleet continued its journey through space. In the command center of the TNS Retribution, Admiral Rodriguez stood looking at the star map showing their route to New Thesha. His weathered face showed the kind of determination that came from a lifetime of making hard choices and living with the consequences. "ATA to New Thesha System, Admiral," asked his tactical officer. 18 hours at current speed. "Any word from the colony? The distress beacon is still transmitting, sir, but we cannot establish direct communication." "Whatever is happening there, it is still happening." Admiral Rodriguez nodded and turned to address his crew. "Listen up, everyone. We do not know what we are flying into, but we know that innocent people are in danger. That means we do our job. We save lives, we stop the bad guys, we come home." Questions. The bridge crew responded with the kind of confidence that came from serving under a commander who had never left anyone behind. "No, sir. Good. All ships maintain current course and speed. Prepare for combat operations upon arrival." As the human fleet raced through space toward New Thesha, the Galactic Council was finally beginning to understand that their newest members were very different from every other species they had ever encountered. While other races valued diplomacy, discussion, and careful planning, humans valued action, protection of the innocent, and the simple idea that when someone asks for help, you give it to them. The distress call from New Thesha had been received by two very different kinds of people. The Galactic Council had responded with meetings, paperwork, and procedures. The humans had responded by loading their guns and pointing their ships toward danger. In 18 hours, the galaxy would learn which approach worked better when lives were on the line. The humans were coming, and they were not interested in following the rules that had allowed innocent people to suffer while committees debated what to do about it. Admiral Rodriguez looked at the stars ahead and made a silent promise to the people of New Thesha. Help was on the way, and nothing in. The galaxy was going to stop it from arriving. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began in chaos. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the great chamber, their voices creating a noise that sounded like angry insects buzzing in a metal box. Council Speaker Villanara, whose body was made of living crystal that changed colors with her emotions, was currently glowing bright red with alarm. "Order! Order!" she called out, her crystalline voice echoing through the chamber. "We must address the immediate crisis. The humans have violated Section 47 Alpha of the Galactic Peace Accords by deploying military forces without Council authorization." Admiral Zexton stood at his assigned speaking position, his scales still showing the dark patterns of fear. "Council Speaker, I have received reports that a human fleet is moving at maximum speed toward the New Thesha system. Their energy signatures indicate they are fully armed and ready for combat." A Zentari representative raised one of his 6 arms to speak. "This is exactly what we warned about when the humans requested membership. They are a violent species from a death world. They cannot be trusted to follow civilized protocols." Council Speaker Velanara's crystal body flickered as she accessed the human species file. What she read made her glow even brighter red with concern. The file contained words that no civilized species wanted to see: death world origin, persistence, predators, extreme environmental adaptability, pack hunters, emotional decision-making, and most terrifying of all, willing to die for others. "I am transmitting an immediate order to the human fleet," she announced. They must reverse course and return to human space while we handle this situation through proper diplomatic channels. The message was sent through subspace directly to Admiral Rodriguez aboard the TNS Retribution. The Admiral was in his ready room reviewing tactical plans when the communication came through. His aide, Commander Johnson, brought him the message with a worried expression on her face. "Sir, the Galactic Council is ordering us to turn around and go home. They say we are violating their peace accords." Admiral Rodriguez read the message twice, his jaw tightening with each word. When he finished, he looked up at Commander Johnson with eyes that had seen too much war to be intimidated by bureaucrats. "Get me a direct channel to Council Speaker Velanara." The channel opened within minutes. The council chamber fell silent. As Admiral Rodriguez appeared on their main display screen, his uniform was military sharp and his expression was harder than steel. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had made life and death decisions for 30 years. "Council Speaker, I have received your order to withdraw. My response is negative. We have civilians under attack and we are going to help them." Velanara's crystal body flashed between red and orange, as she struggled to understand how any species could simply ignore the Council's authority. "Admiral Rodriguez, you cannot take military action without following proper procedures. We have protocols for these situations. Your protocols involve meetings and paperwork while people die." "That is not how humans do things," Rodriguez replied, his voice getting colder. "We received a distress call. We are responding." End of discussion. "Admiral, you must understand that unauthorized military action could lead to galactic war. The attackers at New Thesha are the hegemony of Scarthan. We have been negotiating with them for years." Rodriguez's expression changed to something that made even the crystal speaker step back from her viewing screen. "You have been negotiating with pirates who attack innocent colonies for years. That tells me everything I need to know about your negotiations." A vegan representative stood up, his blue skin turning purple with anger. "Human, you cannot speak to the Council in this manner. We have rules and procedures that have kept peace in the galaxy for centuries. Your peace has been built on letting bad people do bad things while good people suffer," Rodriguez shot back. "That ends now." The Admiral turned his attention back to the speaker. "I'm going to explain something to you people. When humans hear someone asking for help, we help them. When we see innocent people being hurt, we stop the people hurting them. This is not complicated, but the Scarthan have superior numbers and firepower," protested Admiral Zexton. "Our intelligence reports show they have 14 battle cruisers surrounding New Thesha. Your fleet only has 8 ships for the first time." During the conversation, Admiral Rodriguez smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, you are thinking like prey. We are not prey. We are predators, and we have been hunting things that were bigger and stronger than us for our entire evolutionary history." The chamber fell completely silent. Every representative was remembering the stories they had heard about Earth, the death world where everything was trying to kill everything else all the time. They remembered the reports about how humans had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless other disasters that would have destroyed any other species. "The Scarthan follow standard raider tactics," Rodriguez continued. "They surround a colony, threaten the civilians, and demand payment for not hurting them. It has worked for them because every other species in the galaxy would rather pay money than fight. But they have never dealt with humans before." Council Speaker Velanara's crystal form was now flickering rapidly between different colors as her emotions shifted from anger to fear to confusion. "Admiral, surely you understand that. Violence should be the last option, not the first. Violence is not our first option, Speaker. It is our final option. But when someone threatens innocent people and refuses to stop, we make it their last mistake," Rodriguez replied. "We tried to join your galactic community because we hoped we could work together to make the universe a better place. But we will not sit quietly while people suffer because you are afraid to act." The Admiral paused and looked directly at each council member through the screen. "Here is what is going to happen. We are going to New Thesha. We are going to save those colonists. We are going to remove the threat. Then we are going to have a conversation about how things work in human-protected space, repeated the Zentari representative. What gives you the right to declare protection over any part of the galaxy? Rodriguez's expression became even more serious. The same thing that has always given people the right to protect others. The will to do it and the strength to make it happen. If you want to debate the philosophy of it, we can do that after we save the people who are about to die. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in shocked silence. For the first time in centuries, someone had simply refused to follow their orders, and there was nothing they could do about it. The human fleet was too far away to stop, and even if they sent their own ships, everyone knew that council forces were designed for peacekeeping, not fighting against determined opponents. Council Speaker Velanara dimmed to a pale yellow as she realized what was happening. The carefully maintained balance of galactic politics was about to change forever. The humans were not just breaking the rules, they were proving that the rules had been wrong all along. What do we do now? Asked the vegan representative. We wait, replied the speaker. We wait and see what happens when a species that evolved by fighting for survival every day meets pirates who have grown comfortable threatening people who will not fight back in deep space. The human fleet continued toward New Thesha at maximum speed. Behind them, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen when the warnings were ignored and the Deathworld fleet arrived at its destination. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Thesha system like thunder rolling across a quiet sky. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TNS Retribution, his eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed what they were facing. 14 massive Scarthan battle cruisers surrounded the colony world below, their weapons pointed directly at the cities where 50,000 innocent people lived and worked. Sir, we are being hailed by the Scarthan flagship, reported Communications Officer Martinez. Put them on screen, Rodriguez ordered, his voice calm despite the odds they were facing. The main display filled with the image of Commander Vascule, leader of the Scarthan raiding fleet. His species looked like giant snakes that had learned to walk upright, with scales that shifted color to show their emotions and long faces filled with sharp teeth. Right now, Vascule's scales showed the green and gold patterns that meant he was amused and confident. Unknown vessels. You have entered Scarthan territorial waters during a lawful resource acquisition operation, the alien commander said, his voice hissing through the translation system. I suggest you withdraw immediately before you face the consequences of interfering with our business. Rodriguez studied the snake-like alien for exactly 3 seconds before responding. Commander Vascule, this is Admiral Marcus Rodriguez of the Terran Deep Space Navy. You are holding innocent civilians hostage and threatening to harm them. I am ordering you to release them immediately and withdraw from this system, Vascule's scales shifted to show even more amusement. Admiral Rodriguez, you command only 8 ships against our 14. Your vessels are smaller than ours. Your species is new to the galaxy and untested in real combat. I suggest you reconsider your position before we demonstrate the futility of your gesture. Commander, I'm going to give you one chance to leave peacefully. Take your ships and go. Do not harm the colonists. This is the only warning you will receive, the Scarthan leader laughed, a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. Admiral, you clearly do not understand the situation. We hold the high ground with superior numbers and firepower. The colonists below are under our guns. One signal from me and every population center on that planet becomes a crater. You cannot risk their lives by attacking us. Rodriguez looked around his bridge at the men and women who served under him. These were people who had volunteered to put themselves between innocent civilians and those who would hurt them. They had trained for situations exactly like this one, and they were ready to do their duty no matter what the cost. You know what? Commander, you are absolutely right about one thing, Rodriguez said, his voice becoming colder than space itself. I cannot risk their lives by attacking you, Vascule's scales showed satisfaction as he prepared to dictate terms for the colonists' release. Finally, you show wisdom, Admiral. Our demands are simple. Each colonist's freedom costs 1,000 Galactic credits. 50 million credits total, to be paid within 24 hours or we begin executing prisoners. That is why I am not going to attack you, Rodriguez continued. I am going to destroy you before Vasquez could respond. Admiral Rodriguez cut the communication and turned to his tactical officer. All ships, weapons free. Target priority is any Scarthan vessel with weapons pointed at the planet. Rules of engagement are simple. If it shoots at civilians, we remove it from existence. What happened next would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the day that pirates learned to fear humans. The Terran fleet did not charge straight at the enemy. Like primitive warriors, they did not follow the standard battle formations that other species used. Instead, they did something that no Scarthan commander had ever seen before. They fought smart. The human ships split up and came at the raiders from 8 different directions at once. The Scarthan had positioned themselves to threaten the planet below, but this left them spread out and unable to support each other effectively. The humans had studied radar tactics for months, and they knew exactly where the weak points were. The TNS Retribution dove straight toward the Scarthan flagship, while the 2 human heavy cruisers, Defiance and Unstoppable, flanked the enemy formation from above and below. The 3 destroyers, Wolf, Hunter, and Stalker, moved like their name suggested, picking off isolated enemy ships with precise attacks. Commander Vasquez watched in growing horror as his carefully planned operation fell apart around him. The humans fought with a coordination that seemed impossible, as if all 8 ships were controlled by a single mind. When one human vessel was in danger, the others moved to protect it. When they found a weak enemy ship, they concentrated their fire until it was destroyed. How are they doing this? Vasquez screamed at his tactical officer. They are outnumbered. Their ships are smaller. This should be impossible. His officer, a younger Scarthan named Kexver, watched the tactical display with growing understanding. Sir, they are not fighting like civilized species fight. They are fighting like pack hunters. Like predators, the human destroyers demonstrated this perfectly as they surrounded a Scarthan heavy cruiser that had been isolated from the main formation. The 3 ships attacked from different angles, their weapons finding weak points in the enemy's armor with surgical precision. The raider ship tried to turn to face one attacker, only to expose its rear to another. Within minutes, the cruiser was drifting powerless with its crew abandoning ship, but it was the flagship engagement that truly showed the galaxy what humans were capable of. The TNS Retribution faced off against Vasquez's massive battlecruiser in single combat while the rest of the battle raged around them. The Scarthan ship was 3 times larger and carried twice as many weapons, but size meant nothing when facing an opponent who refused to give up. Admiral Rodriguez stood on his bridge as enemy fire shook, his ship like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Damage report: forward shields at 60%. Hull breach on deck 7. Weapon system still operational, called out his damage control officer. Goodhelm, bring us about. Target their engine section. Let us see how well they fight when they cannot run away. The Retribution spun through space with grace that should have been impossible for such a large vessel. Human engineering had always prioritized maneuverability over size, and now that philosophy proved its worth. The Terran flagship danced around the Scarthan cruiser like a fighter facing a giant, staying out of the enemy's strongest weapons while delivering precise strikes to critical systems. Vasquez realized with growing panic that his ship was being systematically destroyed by an opponent half its size. All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship. Destroy it now, but the other Scarthan vessels were having their own problems. The human fleet fought as a unit, supporting each other while exploiting every mistake the raiders made. When 3 Scarthan ships tried to gang up on the heavy cruiser Defiance, the destroyers appeared from nowhere to attack their engines. When the raiders tried to regroup, human ships slipped between them and broke up their formations. The battle that Vasquez had expected to be a simple intimidation of primitives had become a nightmare where nothing worked as it should. His superior numbers meant nothing because the humans refused to fight fair. His larger ships meant nothing because the humans were faster and smarter. His threats against the colonists meant nothing because the humans were willing to risk everything to protect innocent people. "Sir, we have lost 7 ships," reported Kexver, his scales now showing the gray patterns of fear. "The humans have lost none." Vascuel stared at his tactical display in disbelief. 7 of his battle cruisers were either destroyed or drifting, powerless. The remaining ships were damaged and scattered. Meanwhile, all 8 human vessels were still fighting with deadly efficiency. "This is impossible," he whispered. "We are the Scarthan hegemony. We have terrorized this sector for 50 years. How can 8 ships defeat our entire fleet?" The answer came as the TNS Retribution appeared directly in front of his flagship, its weapons charged and ready to fire. Admiral Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system with the cold finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Commander Vascuel, you threatened innocent civilians. In human space, that is a death sentence. Any last words?" Vascuel's scales turned completely white with terror as he realized that the human admiral was not bluffing, was not posturing, was not following any of the civilized rules of warfare that allowed defeated enemies to surrender with honor. The humans had come to kill him and everyone who had threatened innocent people, and nothing in the universe was going to stop them from doing it. The battle was over. The Scarthan hegemony had learned too late that there were some species in the galaxy that would fight back, and some crimes that would not be forgiven. The humans had kept their promise to the colonists of New Thesha, and the raiders would never threaten anyone again. The silence after the battle was broken only by the sound of rescue shuttles launching from the human ships toward the colony world below. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TNS Retribution, watching as his crews began the work they had really come to do. The fighting was over, but saving lives had just begun. "Admiral, we are receiving multiple distress signals from the colony surface," reported Communications Officer Martinez. "It looks like the Scarthan damaged several civilian shelters during the initial attack. Deploy all available medical teams and rescue equipment. I want every person on that planet found and helped," Rodriguez ordered. "And get me a secure channel to Earth Command. They need to know what happened here." On the surface of New Thesha, human Marines in powered armor moved carefully through the damaged sections of New Horizon City, the colony's main settlement. The Scarthan had used fear as their primary weapon, firing on civilian buildings to convince the colonists that resistance was useless. Now those same buildings had become death traps for the people hiding inside. Captain Elena Vasquez led one of the rescue teams through the collapsed remains of what had been a school. Her armor sensors detected life signs buried under tons of metal and concrete. "I have survivors in here," she called over her radio. "Bring the heavy lifters working." Alongside her human Marines were volunteers from a dozen different species. The colonists of New Thesha included Centauri families, Altarian engineers, vegan artists, and humans who had come to work in the deep space mining operations. All of them had been united by terror during the Scarthan attack, and now they were united by hope as the rescuers worked to save everyone they could find. A young Centauri girl, her blue skin covered with dust and tears, was pulled from the rubble by Captain Vasquez herself. The child looked up at the armored human with wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Hey there, little one," Captain Vasquez said softly, her suit's translation system making her words understandable. "You are safe now. The bad people are gone, and they are never coming back." The girl wrapped all 6 of her small arms around the human's armored hand and would not let go. Captain Vasquez carried her to the medical station that had been set up in the town square, where human doctors and medics were working alongside colonial medical staff to treat the wounded. Meanwhile, 300 light-years away in the Galactic Council chambers, chaos ruled supreme. The emergency session had been going on for 6 hours as representatives struggled to understand what had just happened at New Thesha. The tactical reports made no sense to species that had never fought a real war. "How is this possible?" demanded the Centauri representative, his skin changing colors rapidly as his emotions shifted between anger and disbelief. The humans were outnumbered 2 to 1. The Scarthan had bigger ships and more weapons. This should not have been possible. Admiral Sexton stood at his briefing position with his scales showing the deep purple patterns that meant he was profoundly disturbed. Council members, I have reviewed the battle recordings multiple times. The humans did not fight like any civilized species. They fought like predators hunting prey. Council Speaker Velanara's crystal form was flickering rapidly between different colors as she tried to process the implications of what had occurred. Admiral, please explain what you mean by that, Speaker. Most galactic species fight battles the way we handle diplomacy. We establish formations, follow protocols, and minimize casualties on both sides. The humans ignored all of that. They identified their enemies' weaknesses and exploited them. Without mercy, a vegan representative raised one of her forearms to speak. This is exactly what we feared when they joined the Council. They are a violent species that cannot be trusted. To follow civilized behavior with respect, Counselor, the humans only attacked those who were threatening innocent civilians, Admiral Sexton replied. They followed the most basic law of any civilized society. They protected the weak from the strong. The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. For decades, the Galactic Council had dealt with the Scarthan hegemony through negotiation, economic pressure, and strongly worded diplomatic protests. None of it had worked. The raiders had continued to attack colonies, kidnap civilians, and demand ransom payments because they knew that no one would actually fight them. The humans had ended 50 years of piracy in 2 hours. We are receiving a transmission from Admiral Rodriguez, announced the Council's communications officer. Put him on the main screen, ordered Speaker Velanara. Admiral Rodriguez appeared before the assembled Council, but he looked different than he had during their previous conversation. The hard expression was gone, replaced by something that might have been sadness. Behind him, through the viewport of his ship, the lights of rescue operations could be seen continuing on New Thesha's surface. Council Speaker, I am reporting the successful resolution of the New Thesha crisis, Rodriguez said formally. All civilian hostages have been freed. The Scarthan raiding fleet has been neutralized. Rescue operations are ongoing. Admiral Rodriguez, your actions have created a diplomatic crisis, began the vegan representative. The Scarthan hegemony was a recognized political entity. Destroying their fleet was an act of war. Rodriguez turned his attention to the vegan with an expression that made several council members step backward. Counselor, the Scarthan hegemony was a criminal organization that specialized in kidnapping and murder. If stopping criminals from hurting innocent people is an act of war, then we are at war, but there are proper procedures for dealing with criminal activity, protested the Zentari representative. Economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, negotiated settlements. How well did those procedures work for the families of the 3,000 colonists the Scarthan murdered over the past 5 years? Rodriguez asked quietly. How well did they work for the children sold into slavery while your diplomats wrote strongly worded letters? The chamber fell silent again. No one wanted to admit that their peaceful methods had failed completely while the Scarthan grew bolder and more violent with each successful raid. Council Speaker Velanara's crystal form had settled into a steady amber glow that indicated deep thought. Admiral, what you have done will have consequences throughout the galaxy. Every criminal organization now knows that humans will respond to threats against civilians with immediate and overwhelming force. Good, Rodriguez replied simply. Maybe that will make them think twice before they hurt innocent people. But what about the balance of power? Asked Admiral Sexton. What about the peace we have maintained for centuries? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, looking directly at each council member through the screen. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. Admiral, your peace was built on the suffering of people who were too weak to defend themselves. The Scarthan knew they could attack colonies because no one would stop them. Pirates across the galaxy know they can threaten civilians because the worst thing that will happen is a diplomatic protest. He paused and gestured toward the viewport behind him. Right now, my people are pulling survivors out of collapsed buildings. We are treating wounded children and comforting families who thought they were going to die. That is what your peace cost. That is what your balance of power allowed to happen. What do you want from us, Admiral? Asked Speaker Velanara. I want you to understand something very clearly, Rodriguez replied. Humanity will not stand by and watch innocent people suffer, while committees debate proper procedures. When civilians call for help, we will answer. When criminals threaten peaceful colonies, we will stop them. This is not negotiable. The Admiral's expression became even more serious. To every pirate, raider, and criminal organization listening to this transmission, I want you to understand something. The galaxy has changed. There are now people who will fight back. There are now consequences for hurting innocent civilians. Rodriguez paused and looked directly into the camera. You want to raid colonies, rob merchants, and terrorize peaceful settlements? Do it somewhere else? Because if you do it anywhere that asks for our protection, you will answer to us. And we will not accept your surrender. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in shocked silence. Every representative understood that they had just witnessed the end of an era. The careful balance of galactic politics built on compromise and negotiation was gone. In its place was something new and frightening. A species that would fight for strangers, die for principles, and kill for justice on New Vesha. The rescue operations continued through the night. Human medics worked alongside colonial doctors to save lives. Human engineers helped repair damaged infrastructure. Human marines stood guard to make sure that no one else would ever threaten this place again. The galaxy had learned that warnings could be ignored, but consequences could not be avoided. The Deathworld fleet had moved. The battle was won, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months after the Battle of New Vesha, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Pirates' raids in the Outer Rim territories had dropped by 90%, not because of increased council patrols or diplomatic agreements, but because every criminal organization in known space had heard about what happened when you threatened people under human protection. Admiral Rodriguez stood in his ready room aboard the TNS Retribution, reading the daily intelligence reports that came in from across human space. The numbers told a story that even he found hard to believe. Colony attacks down to almost zero. Merchant shipping losses at historic lows. Requests for human protection increasing every day. Admiral, we have another formal request for protection, announced Commander Johnson as she entered his office. This one is from the Kepler Mining Consortium. They operate 17 asteroid mining stations in the Outer Rim. Rodriguez looked up from his reports with interest. What kind of threats are they facing? The usual, sir. Pirates demanding tribute payments, raiders threatening to destroy their facilities if they do not pay protection money. The same things that have been happening for decades, except now the criminals know that some people will actually fight back. The Admiral nodded thoughtfully. How many ships would we need to patrol their territory effectively? 2 destroyers should be sufficient, sir. Just having human ships in the area will probably be enough to keep the criminals away. Approved. Send the Wolf and the Hunter. Rodriguez decided. And make sure the pirates know we are there. Meanwhile, in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the political landscape had shifted in ways that would have been impossible just months earlier. The Outer Rim colonies, which had always been treated as secondary concerns by the core worlds, now held unprecedented influence in council proceedings. Council Speaker Velanara called the session to order, her crystal form glowing with the steady blue light that indicated she was working hard to maintain her composure. Today we must address the continued expansion of human protection agreements throughout the galaxy. The Zentari representative, whose skin was showing the orange patterns that meant he was angry, stood to address the chamber. Speaker, we cannot allow one species to unilaterally declare protection over vast areas of space. This undermines the authority of the Council and violates every principle of galactic governance. With respect, Counselor, interrupted the representative from New Vesha, a human woman named Sarah Mitchell, who had been elected by the grateful colonists. The Council had 50 years to protect our colonies from raiders. You failed. The humans succeeded in 2 hours. Admiral Zexthan, who had been promoted to Council military advisor after his accurate reports about human capabilities, stood to present his analysis. Council members, we must face the reality of our situation. Human protection has proven more effective than any security measure. He activated a holographic display that showed piracy statistics across the galaxy. In sectors under human protection, criminal activity has decreased by 87%. In sectors still relying solely on Council security, attacks have actually increased as raiders avoid human space. A vegan representative raised her concerns. But at what cost, Admiral? The humans solve every problem through violence. They have no regard for negotiation or diplomatic solutions. Counselor, the humans negotiate extensively, Admiral Zexton replied. Their negotiation process is simply different from ours. They tell criminals to stop hurting people or face destruction. Most criminals choose to stop. The debate was interrupted by an emergency communication from the Outer Rim. A colony called Haven's Rest was under attack by the Crimson Fleet, a large pirate organization that had decided to test whether the humans would really protect every settlement that asked for help. Council Speaker Velanara immediately began. The standard emergency procedures. We must convene an emergency committee to assess the situation. Schedule a diplomatic contact session with the Crimson Fleet leadership. Begin preparing economic pressure options. Speaker, with your permission. We have already contacted the human fleet, announced Representative Mitchell. They are responding to Haven's Rest distress call as we speak. The chamber erupted in protests from the core world representatives, but before any formal objections could be raised, Admiral Rodriguez appeared on the main display screen. He was standing on the bridge of his flagship, and behind him the stars were streaking past at faster-than-light speeds. Council Speaker, I am reporting that human forces are responding to the Haven's Rest emergency. We will arrive in 4 hours, Rodriguez announced. Admiral, the Council has not authorized military action, protested the Zentari representative. You cannot simply ignore our authority, Rodriguez looked at the alien politician with the same expression he might have used when examining something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. Counselor, innocent people are being attacked right now while you talk about authorization. My authorization comes from the people asking for help. But what if your intervention causes a larger war? Asked Speaker Velanara. The Crimson Fleet has over 30 ships. This could escalate beyond control. For the first time during the conversation, Admiral Rodriguez smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Speaker, the Crimson Fleet had 30 ships this morning. By tonight, they will have whatever number we decide to leave alive. The transmission ended, leaving the Council in the familiar position of watching helplessly as humans ignored their protests and did what they thought was right. 4 hours later, reports began coming in from Haven's Rest. The battle had lasted exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes. The Crimson Fleet had ceased to exist as an organized force. What made this battle different from New Thesha was not the outcome, but the reaction throughout the galaxy. Criminal organizations that had been considering testing human resolve suddenly decided they had urgent business elsewhere. Pirate fleets that had operated in the Outer Rim for decades simply disappeared, their crews scattering to find safer occupations. Admiral Rodriguez returned to the Council chamber 2 weeks later. Not as a military commander reporting on emergency actions, but as an official representative of human space. The formal censure that had been prepared for his unauthorized military interventions had been quietly withdrawn after 15. Different colonial governments testified that human protection had saved countless lives. Admiral Rodriguez, the Council acknowledges that your methods have achieved remarkable results in terms of civilian safety, began Council Speaker Velanara, her crystal form showing the careful neutral white that indicated she was trying very hard not to take sides. However, we must establish formal protocols for future interventions. Rodriguez sat in the chair that had been provided for him and looked around the chamber at representatives from dozens of worlds. Many of them were still afraid of him, but others, especially those from the Outer Rim colonies, looked at him with something approaching worship. Speaker, protocols are simple, he replied. When innocent people ask for help, we help them. When criminals threaten peaceful settlements, we stop the criminals. When pirates demand ransom for civilian lives, we remove the pirates from the universe, but surely you understand that not every problem can be solved through military force, pressed Admiral Zexton, who had developed a grudging respect for human methods even if he did not fully understand them. Rodriguez considered this seriously. Admiral, you are absolutely right. Military force should never be the first solution to any problem, but it should always be available as the final solution when everything else fails. He stood and walked to the center of the chamber where he could address all the representatives directly. For 50 years, this council has tried to solve the problem of piracy through negotiation, economic pressure, and diplomatic protests. How did that work out for the families of the 12,000 civilians who died during that time? The chamber was silent. Everyone knew the statistics, but no one wanted to admit that their peaceful methods had failed so completely. The galaxy is not a perfect place, Rodriguez continued. There are people who choose to hurt others for profit, power, or entertainment. Those people do not respond to diplomatic negotiations or economic sanctions. They respond to strength and consequences. A representative from one of the core worlds, an elderly crystalline diplomat, raised a shimmering hand. Admiral, what you describe sounds like the law of the jungle. Might makes right. No, sir, Rodriguez replied firmly. Might makes right is when the strong prey on the weak because they can. What we practice is might protects right. We use our strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Council Speaker Velanara S. form flickered as she processed this distinction. And what happens when someone disagrees with what you consider right, Admiral? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Speaker, we do not impose our values on anyone. We do not conquer worlds or demand tribute. We do not interfere in how other species govern themselves. But when someone calls for help, we answer. And when criminals threaten innocent people, we stop them. The session continued for several more hours. But the real business had been concluded in those first few minutes. The galaxy now understood the new reality. Humanity would not be bullied, threatened, or deterred from protecting innocent life. They had the ships, the weapons, and most importantly, the will to fight for strangers who had no other defenders. 6 months later, the phrase human protected space had become synonymous with safety throughout the Outer Rim territories. Pirates avoided it, merchants sought it out, and families moved to colonies that could claim human protection. The balance of power that had existed for centuries was gone, replaced by something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that would fight and die for people they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of his flagship, looking out at the stars that now seemed a little brighter and a lot safer. The warning had been ignored, the Deathworld fleet had moved, and the galaxy was learning that sometimes the best diplomacy was carried out by people who were willing to back up their words with action. In the vast darkness of space, monitoring stations throughout dozens of star systems maintained their constant watch, not for threats anymore, but for distress calls. Because everyone now knew that when someone asked for help, the humans would answer, and when innocent people were threatened, there would be consequences. The galaxy had become a better place, one battle at a time. The silence of deep space was broken by a faint signal that reached the human monitoring station near Jupiter. Commander Marcus Webb had been drinking his morning coffee when the computers started screaming alerts across the bridge. For 20 years he had watched the empty void between stars, and this was the first time something had actually happened. Dr. Elena Vasquez rushed to her console with excitement in her eyes. She was the best language expert humanity had ever produced, and her fingers flew across the translation programs as she worked to decode the strange transmission. The signal was weak and full of static, but there was definitely intelligence behind it. Commander, this is not random noise, she said without looking up from her screens. This is a structured language, and whoever sent it is in serious trouble. Webb moved closer to watch her work. The signal kept repeating the same pattern over and over, like someone desperately trying to reach anyone who might listen. After 3 hours of hard work, Elena finally cracked the basic structure of the alien Language. The message was simple and terrifying. It came from something called the Quillen Federation, and their homeworld was under attack by creatures called the Vorth Empire. The aliens were asking for help from anyone who might receive their transmission. They had heard rumors of a species called humans who lived on a world so dangerous that even pirates avoided their space. "They are calling us Deathworlders," Elena said with wonder in her voice. "They think we might be strong enough to help them fight." Webb felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity had always known they were different from what they imagined other alien species might be like. Earth was a brutal world that had forged them into something harder than they realized. Every day on their homeworld was a fight for survival against weather that could kill in minutes and creatures that saw humans as food. Before Webb could respond, his communications officer, Captain Rex Morrison, burst onto the bridge. The man they called Bulldog was covered in sweat and his face was pale with shock. He had been monitoring the outer system sensors when something impossible had appeared. "Commander, we have ships coming through the Jupiter Gate," he said between heavy breaths. "They are not human designs, and they look like they have been through hell." The first alien ship to ever enter human space was barely holding together. Its hull was covered in burn marks and several sections had been completely torn away. Behind it came dozens more vessels, all in similar condition. These were refugee ships carrying the survivors of whatever horror had destroyed their worlds. Webb ordered his people to prepare the docking bays while he tried to process what was happening. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be a moment of celebration for all humanity. Instead, it looked like they were meeting the survivors of a genocide. The first alien to step onto the human station was barely alive. Ambassador Kethver of the Quillen Federation was a creature that looked somewhat like a cross between a bird and a lizard. His feathers were burned and his left arm was missing below the elbow. When he spoke through the translation device, his voice was filled with desperation. "Please, you must help us," he begged Webb while falling to his knees. "The Vorth Empire is destroying everything we have ever built. They do not kill us quickly. They keep us alive while they harvest our bodies." For their own use, Elena gasped in horror as she translated more of the refugee reports. The Vorth were not just conquerors, they were something far worse. They had turned genocide into an industrial process. Entire species were kept in massive facilities where their genetic material was extracted while they remained conscious. The aliens saw this as efficient resource management. More Quillen ships kept arriving throughout the day, each one carrying stories of horror that made the humans feel sick. The Vorth had attacked without warning, and their technology was far beyond what the peaceful Quillens could resist. World after world had fallen to their harvesting fleets. "How many of your people are still alive?" Webb asked Kethver during an emergency meeting. "Perhaps 10 million scattered across the refugee fleets," the alien replied with tears in his strange eyes. "But our homeworld of Kathmora still holds 20 billion souls. The Vorth are saving it for last because it has the largest population." To harvest, Webb felt something cold and angry building in his chest. He had fought in the Outer Rim conflicts where humans had battled each other over resources and territory. Those wars had been brutal beyond imagination, but they had rules and limits. What the Vorth were doing was not war, it was extermination with torture added for efficiency. Dr. Vasquez spent hours interviewing the refugees, and what she learned made her hands shake as she typed her reports. The Vorth Empire controlled thousands of worlds and had wiped out hundreds of species over the centuries. They were the ultimate predators who saw all other life as nothing but raw materials for their expansion. "They have heard stories about humans," she told Webb privately. "Word has spread through the galaxy about a species that lives on a death world. Pirates and raiders tell stories about humans who fight with a fury that terrifies even the most violent criminals." Webb realized that humanity's reputation had somehow spread beyond their own solar system. The constant warfare between human nations and the daily struggle to survive on Earth had created something that other species found frightening. They were not just another alien race, they were apex predators who had been forged by a world that tried to kill them every day. The refugee leader Kethver approached Webb with a desperate proposal. The Quillen Federation was offering humanity everything they owned in exchange for military assistance. Their technology, their knowledge, their entire civilization would belong to humans if they would only help fight the Vorth. "We do not need payment to fight monsters," Webb replied with a grim smile. "But we will need to know everything about their capabilities and weaknesses." Captain Morrison was already reviewing the tactical data from the refugee ships. The Vorth war machine was massive and sophisticated, but it had one critical flaw. They had never fought an enemy that used the kind of brutal tactics that humans considered normal battlefield behavior. "Their ships are designed for overwhelming firepower against defenseless targets," he reported to Webb. "They have never had to deal with enemies who fight dirty or use suicide attacks. They expect their opponents to surrender when faced with superior numbers." Webb began to smile for the first time since the crisis had started. The Vorth had made the mistake of thinking that all species would react to hopeless odds the same way. They had no idea what humans did when someone threatened innocent people with torture and death. As the day ended, Webb stood looking out at the stars where somewhere the Vorth Empire was continuing its harvest of living beings. He thought about the billions of Quillanes waiting to die on their homeworld and the millions of refugees who had placed their hope in creatures they called Deathworlders. Then his communications officer burst into the room with news that changed everything. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet moving toward the Sol system. The Vorth had followed the refugee ships back to their source, and now they were coming to investigate the mysterious humans for themselves. "How long until they arrive?" Webb asked with deadly calm in his voice. 18 hours, sir," Morrison replied. "The fleet is enormous. One count over 300 ships, including several that match the descriptions of harvester vessels." Webb looked out at the stars one more time, then activated the emergency communication system that would reach every human military installation. In the solar system, the message he sent was short and simple. "This is Commander Webb at Jupiter Station. Hostile aliens are approaching Earth with the intent to harvest our population. All units prepare for total war. Show them why they call U.S. Deathworlders." Admiral Catherine Hayes received the emergency signal while reviewing fleet deployments in her command center. Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the woman they called the Iron Lady had spent 40 years preparing for the day when humanity would face an existential threat. She had never imagined it would come from beyond the stars. "Activate Protocol Omega," she commanded her staff with the same tone she might use to order coffee. "All hidden assets are to reveal themselves immediately. The masquerade is over. Across the solar system, humanity's true military might begin to emerge from shadows where it had been hiding for decades. What the galaxy saw as a single inhabited world was actually the heart of a war machine that had been built through centuries of conflict and paranoia. Near the asteroid belt, massive hangar doors opened in rocks that had seemed empty for generations. Hundreds of warships that had been disguised as mining operations powered up their weapon systems and began moving toward Earth. In the clouds of Venus, atmospheric processors transformed into mobile battle platforms. Even the moon revealed hidden launch bays that released swarms of fighter craft. General Dmitry Kozlov watched the mobilization from his underground bunker on Mars. The red planet that tourists saw as a peaceful colony world was actually humanity's largest military training ground. Millions of soldiers who had been pretending to be farmers and miners put on their battle armor and prepared for war. "How many troops can we deploy?" Hayes asked him over the secure communication link. 50 million ground forces ready for immediate deployment," Kozlov replied while reviewing his unit reports. "Another 100 million reserves can be activated within 72 hours. Every human colony world has been preparing for this day." Captain Lisa Park received her orders while her stealth ship was docked at Europa Station. She commanded the most advanced reconnaissance vessel humanity had ever built, and her mission was simple: get behind enemy lines and learn everything possible about Vorth capabilities before the shooting started. Her ship, the Shadow Walker, was designed with technology that even most humans did not know existed. It could become completely invisible to sensors and slip through enemy fleets like a ghost. Park had used similar vessels to spy on hostile human nations during the colony wars. "Remember, we need intelligence, not heroics," Admiral Hayes told her. Before departure, find out how they fight and what they fear. The lives of every human in the solar system depend on the information you bring back. Park's journey to Vorth space took 18 hours of traveling through hyperspace corridors that few beings in the galaxy knew how to navigate. When she emerged on the edge of their territory, what she saw made her stomach turn with disgust and rage. The Vorth had turned an entire star system into a processing facility for captured species. Massive space stations orbited dead worlds, while transport ships constantly moved between them carrying their horrific cargo. Park used her ship's advanced sensors to record everything she could while staying hidden in the shadow of a shattered moon. The first station she investigated contained thousands of beings from dozens of different species. They were kept alive in transparent tubes while machines slowly extracted their genetic material. The process was designed to keep them conscious throughout the procedure so their biological systems would remain active. Park had seen human war crimes during the Mars Rebellion, but nothing had prepared her for the industrial scale of Vorth cruelty. These creatures did not torture for information or pleasure. They simply saw other life forms as raw materials to be processed with maximum efficiency. She transmitted her findings back to Earth using quantum communication channels that the Vorth could not detect. The images and data she sent would fuel human rage in ways that no propaganda could match. Every soldier who saw what the Vorth did to their victims would fight with the fury of someone defending their own family, while Park, gathered intelligence engineer Tommy O'Brien, was putting the finishing touches on humanity's newest weapons in the hidden factories of Titan. The moon that seemed to be a research station was actually the largest weapons development facility in human space. "The gravity bombs are ready for deployment," he reported to Admiral Hayes during their morning briefing. "Each one can collapse the internal structure of a ship from the inside out. The plasma lances can cut through any known armor, and the kinetic kill vehicles will punch holes through entire fleets." O'Brien's weapons were designed with the brutal efficiency that characterized all human military technology. They were not elegant or sophisticated like the energy weapons that other species preferred. They were simple devices that delivered overwhelming destructive force with complete reliability. The Quillan refugees watched the human military awakening with growing amazement and fear. Ambassador Kethver had expected the Deathworlders to have some hidden strength, but the scale of their preparations was beyond anything he had imagined. Every human civilian seemed to be a potential soldier, and every peaceful facility was actually a disguised military installation. "How long have you been preparing for war?" he asked Commander Webb during a briefing on the Jupiter station. "Since the day we learned to make fire," Webb replied with a grim smile. "Humans have been fighting something every day for 50,000 years. Other species, it seems, have enjoyed longer periods of peace." Captain Park's stealth mission took a dangerous turn when she attempted to infiltrate a Vorth command vessel to steal their tactical databases. The aliens had security systems that were more advanced than she had expected, and her ship was detected while downloading their files. Alarms began screaming throughout the Vorth fleet as they realized an unknown vessel had penetrated their most secure systems. Park found herself trapped in the middle of hundreds of enemy ships with no way to escape undetected. Her only option was to fight her way out and hope the intelligence she had gathered was worth the risk. The Shadow Walker revealed why human ships were feared throughout the outer colonies. Instead of trying to outrun the Vorth vessels, Park turned and attacked them with weapons that had been designed for close-quarters combat. Her ship was smaller and faster than anything the aliens had ever faced. She destroyed 6 Vorth cruisers and damaged a dozen more before finally breaking free of their formation. The aliens had never encountered tactics like ramming attacks or point-blank missile strikes. They were used to fighting enemies who kept their distance and followed predictable patterns. Park's escape provided humanity with their first tactical victory against the Vorth, but it came at a terrible cost. The aliens now knew that someone had infiltrated their secure systems, and they began changing their codes and frequencies. More importantly, they had gotten their first look at human military technology. "The enemy knows we are coming," Admiral Hayes announced to her command staff. After receiving Park's final transmission, "They will be ready for us when we arrive at their territory. We need to move faster than originally planned." General Kozlov reported that his ground forces were fully mobilized and ready for deployment. The soldiers who had trained on Mars in gravity that was 1/3 of Earth normal would fight like superhumans. On most alien worlds, their equipment was designed to function in environments that would kill most other species. The final piece of humanity's war machine was their industrial capacity. Every human world began converting civilian factories to military production at a pace that seemed impossible to outside observers. The same efficiency that had allowed humans to survive on their Deathworld now served to equip the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Hayes stood in her command center watching displays that showed the positions of over 10,000 human ships throughout the solar system. Each vessel was commanded by officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Every crew member understood that they were not just fighting for human survival, but for the right of all innocent species to exist without fear. Captain Park's damaged ship limped back to Jupiter Station with intelligence that would change everything. The data she had stolen revealed that the Vorth were not just planning to harvest the Quillan homeworld. They intended to use it as bait to capture and study the mysterious Deathworlders who had dared to spy on their operations. "They want to take us alive," she reported to Commander Webb while medical teams treated her injuries. "The Vorth High Command believes that humans might be the ultimate species for their harvesting program. They think our Deathworld genetics could make them unstoppable." Webb felt a cold fury building in his chest as he realized the true scope of Vorth ambition. These creatures did not just want to destroy humanity, they wanted to turn human genetic material into weapons against the rest of the galaxy. The very thing that made humans dangerous would be used to enslave every other species. The transmission ended with Park's ship exploding in a flash of light that could be seen from the outer planets. She had activated the self-destruct rather than allow the Vorth to capture any human technology or crew members. Her final message was burned into the memory of every person who heard it. "Tell them we are coming and hell is coming with us." The human armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Vorth territory like a storm made of metal and fury. Admiral Hayes commanded the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled from the bridge of her flagship, the Retribution. 3,000 ships spread across space in a formation that blocked out the stars behind them. The Vorth response was immediate and arrogant. Their war prime Gexstar opened a communication channel to deliver what he clearly expected to be terms of surrender. The alien's voice carried the casual confidence of a predator who had never met anything that could threaten him. "Unknown vessels, you have entered territory claimed by the Vorth Empire," he announced while his own fleet moved to surround the humans. "Surrender immediately, and your species will be granted the honor of serving our expansion. Resist, and you will be harvested." Like all the others, Admiral Hayes studied the alien's image on her main screen. Gexstar looked like a cross between a spider and a shark with too many eyes and teeth that seemed designed for tearing flesh. Behind him, she could see the bridge of his command ship, which was decorated with the bones of conquered species. "This is Admiral Catherine Hayes of the Human Space Navy," she replied with the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. "We have come to collect our friends and destroy your harvesting operation. You have one chance to release all prisoners and withdraw from Quillan space." The alien war prime began to laugh with a sound like breaking glass. He had conquered hundreds of worlds and faced dozens of species that had made similar threats. In his experience, all creatures became reasonable when faced with overwhelming force and the prospect of painful death. "Your species' reputation for violence is somewhat exaggerated," Gexstar said while signaling his fleet to attack positions. "We have studied the data from our encounter with your scout ship. Humans are simply another animal that has forgotten its place in the natural order." Admiral Hayes looked around her bridge at the officers who had spent their lives preparing for this moment. Each one had been forged by a world that tried to kill them every day and trained by wars against enemies who showed no mercy. The alien had just made the last mistake of his life. "No," she said, and closed the communication channel. The space battle that followed shattered every assumption the galaxy had about how wars were fought. Human ships moved with a coordination that seemed impossible while using tactics that appeared to be suicide missions. They rammed enemy vessels at full speed, then teleported boarding parties into the wreckage to continue fighting. Colonel Jake Harrison led the first human ground assault from his dropship as it burned through the atmosphere of a Vorth harvesting station. The facility was built into an asteroid and defended by weapons that could destroy conventional landing craft before they got close. Human Marines did not use conventional landing craft. They came down in armored pods that were fired from railguns like bullets. Each pod contained a single soldier in powered armor that could survive impacts that would turn most creatures into paste. Harrison's pod smashed through the station's outer hull and he was fighting Vorth defenders before the aliens even realized they were under attack. The creatures inside the facility had never faced anything like human Marines in close combat. Harrison and his troops fought in environments that would kill most species without protection. They used weapons designed for maximum destruction and showed a complete disregard for odds. "That should have been impossible to overcome, Dr. Maria." Santos ran through the corridors of the same harvesting station treating wounded Marines, while also trying to save the alien prisoners they were liberating. What she found in the facility's detention areas made her understand why humanity's response had been so absolute and merciless. The Vorth had turned torture into a science. Beings from dozens of species were kept in transparent tubes while machines slowly extracted their genetic material. The process was designed to keep them conscious and aware throughout the procedure so their biological systems would remain at peak efficiency. Santos worked frantically to disconnect the devices that were keeping the prisoners alive while slowly killing them. Many of the beings she rescued had been in the tubes for months or even years. Their minds were broken by constant pain, but their bodies were still functional enough for the Vorth harvesting process. "How can any species be this cruel?" she asked Harrison when they met in the facility's central chamber. "Because they never met anything that could make them pay for it," he replied while setting explosives that would destroy the entire station. "That changes today." In space above them, pilot Ace Rodriguez led his fighter squadron through the enemy fleet like sharks swimming through schools of fish. The Vorth had numbers, but human pilots had been trained in combat conditions that would have killed most other species before they ever reached their ships. Rodriguez's fighter was hit by enemy fire that should have destroyed it completely. Instead, he used the damaged engines to ram a Vorth cruiser while ejecting at the last second. His backup pilot picked him up from the wreckage, and they continued fighting as if nothing had happened. The Vorth War. Prime Gextar watched his fleet being torn apart by enemies who fought with a fury that defied all logic. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting even after taking damage that would cripple normal vessels. Their crews seemed to prefer death over retreat. "How are they still fighting?" he demanded from his tactical officers who had no answers to give him. "Their technology is primitive compared to ours, but they are destroying ships 10 times their size." What Gextar did not understand was that human technology was not designed to be sophisticated. It was designed to be reliable under conditions that would destroy more advanced systems. Human weapons were built by a species that had learned to fight wars in environments ranging from Arctic ice to molten deserts. Admiral Hayes coordinated the battle from her command center while watching tactical displays that showed her forces systematically dismantling the Vorth fleet. Each human ship fought with the independence of a pack hunter while maintaining perfect coordination with the larger formation. "Enemy flagship is trying to withdraw," reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Zoe Campbell. "War Prime Gextar is broadcasting surrender terms on all frequencies." Hayes looked at the images coming from the liberated harvesting stations, where her Marines were discovering the full scope of Vorth cruelty. Beings who had been tortured for months or years were finally being freed from their nightmare. Some of them would never recover from what had been done to them. No prisoners, she commanded with the same calm voice she had used throughout the battle. Hunt down every ship and make sure the galaxy understands what happens to species that harvest other beings for food. The pursuit of the fleeing Vorth vessels became legendary among the races that later heard the story. Human ships chased their enemies through asteroid fields and gas giant storms that should have been impossible to navigate. They used the environment itself as a weapon against creatures who had never learned to fight in truly hostile conditions. Chief Petty Officer Ron Mitchell had served in human military forces for 30 years and seen combat on a dozen different worlds. Even he was impressed by the sheer determination his people showed when fighting to protect innocent beings from torture and death. "I have never seen humans fight like this," he told Dr. Santos while they worked to evacuate rescued prisoners from the destroyed harvesting station. "It is like something ancient and terrible has been awakened in all of us." Santos nodded while treating a Quillen child who had been in the harvesting tubes for 6 months. The little one's injuries would heal, but the psychological damage might last forever. That knowledge fueled a cold rage in every human who saw it. The space battle reached its climax when Admiral Hayes ordered her fleet to surround the main Vorth command ship. War Prime Gexstar had run out of places to hide, and his remaining vessels were too damaged to continue fighting. He opened communications one final time to offer terms that might save his life. "Human Admiral, I propose an exchange," he said with desperation creeping into his voice. "Release my forces, and I will provide you with the locations of all Vorth harvesting facilities in this sector. You could save millions of beings who are currently being processed." Hayes considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds before responding. She had seen what these creatures did to helpless prisoners, and she knew that any mercy shown to them would be viewed as weakness by the rest of their empire. "The only exchange I am interested in is your life for the lives of everyone you have." "Tortured," she replied while signaling her weapons officers to prepare for final attack. "But since you cannot give back what you have taken, I will settle for making sure you never take anything else." The destruction of Gexstar's command ship was visible from 3 star systems away. Admiral Hayes had used a gravity bomb that collapsed the vessel's internal structure while broadcasting the final screams of its crew on all frequencies. She wanted every Vorth in the galaxy to understand that humans had come for them. Colonel Harrison's Marines finished securing the last harvesting station and began the grim task of counting the prisoners they had liberated. Over 2 million beings from 40 different species had been rescued from facilities that were designed to keep them alive while slowly consuming them. "How many did we lose?" Admiral Hayes asked during the post-battle briefing. 43 ships destroyed and 800 personnel killed in action," reported General Kozlov, who had coordinated the ground assaults. "Considering the enemy's numerical advantage, those are remarkably light casualties." Hayes nodded but felt no satisfaction in the victory. The real measure of success would be whether they had arrived in time to save the billions of beings still trapped on the Quillen homeworld. Intelligence reports suggested that the main Vorth harvesting fleet was already moving toward that target. Dr. Santos transmitted her medical reports on the rescued prisoners to every human ship in the fleet. The images of what the Vorth had done would ensure that no human would ever show mercy to these creatures. Some wounds could only be healed by making sure they never happened again. As the human fleet prepared to continue toward Quillen space, Admiral Hayes received a priority transmission from her intelligence officers. War Prime Gexstar had escaped in a small craft during the final moments of the battle. His ship had been detected broadcasting a message toward the core worlds of the Vorth Empire. "What was in the transmission?" Hayes asked while reviewing the tactical data. Lieutenant Campbell's face was pale as she delivered the news that would change everything. "He sent our location and tactical capabilities to the Vorth supremacy, sir. The entire Empire now knows that humans exist and where to find us." Admiral Hayes faced the most difficult decision in human military history as our fleet approached the Quillen homeworld of Kethmora. Long-range sensors showed a massive orbital weapon positioned above the planet, while the remaining Vorth fleet had formed a defensive perimeter around it. Warprime Gexstar had escaped to here and was making his final stand. "The device is a planetary atmosphere stripper," reported Commander Nate Turner from his analysis station. Turner was humanity's best expert on alien weapons, and what he saw on his screens filled him with cold dread. "If activated, it will turn the entire planet into a lifeless rock within hours. On the surface below, 20 billion Quillan civilians waited in terror as Vorth ground forces herded them into massive concentration camps. The aliens had learned from their earlier defeats and were using the planet's population as a human shield. Any attack on their orbital weapon would result in immediate retaliation against innocent beings. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical situation while her officers waited for orders that would determine the fate of an entire civilization. She could attack the orbital weapon and save the galaxy from its threat, but millions would die in the process. She could negotiate with Gexstar, but that would give him time to complete his harvesting operations. "Ma'am, we are receiving a transmission from the Quillan government," announced Lieutenant Zoe Campbell from her communications station. "Elder Morthic is asking us to save as many of his people as possible, even if it means sacrificing the rest." Hayes looked at the tactical display showing her 3,000 ships, facing an enemy force twice their size, while a doomsday weapon held an entire world hostage. Any normal military commander would have called for reinforcements or attempted to negotiate terms. Hayes was not normal, and neither was her species. "Split the fleet," she commanded with the same calm voice she had used throughout the crisis. "Admiral North will take half our ships and disable that orbital weapon. I will pursue the Vorth fleet with the remainder and make sure they never threaten anyone again." Her officers stared at her with expressions that mixed admiration with concern for her sanity. Dividing their forces in the face of superior numbers violated every principle of tactical doctrine they had ever learned. It was exactly the kind of impossible decision that only humans would attempt. "Ma'am, that will leave both task forces severely outnumbered," warned her tactical officer with obvious worry in his voice. "The enemy will be able to concentrate their full strength against either group." Hayes turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering in the past few days. She had reviewed Dr. Santos's medical reports on the rescued prisoners and witnessed the industrial scale of Vorth cruelty. Some enemies deserved mercy, but these creatures had forfeited that right through their own actions. They made it personal. "When they tortured innocents," she replied while signaling the fleet to begin dividing into two formations. "We are not here to win a conventional victory. We are here to teach the galaxy that some lines cannot be crossed." Commander Turner led the most desperate mission in human military history as his team prepared to infiltrate the orbital weapon that threatened the Quillan homeworld. The device was the size of a small moon and defended by automated systems that could destroy approaching ships before they got within weapons range. His assault team traveled in modified mining pods that were designed to look like space debris while carrying enough explosives to level a city. Each pod held a single demolition expert in powered armor who would have to fight their way through alien security forces to reach the weapon's core systems. "Remember, we only get one chance at this," Turner told his people over their private communication channel. "If we fail, 20 billion beings die and humanity gets blamed for the massacre." The pods approached the orbital weapon by hiding in the exhaust plumes of destroyed Vorth ships from the earlier battle. Turner's team had studied the device's specifications during their approach, and what they found was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The atmosphere stripper was not just a weapon, it was a harvesting tool. Instead of simply destroying the planet's air supply, it would collect and process every living molecule for later use by the Vorth Empire. The entire population of Kethmara would be converted into raw materials. While remaining conscious throughout the procedure, Turner's pod crashed through the weapon's outer hull, and he found himself fighting Vorth defenders, who had been specially bred for combat in zero-gravity environments. These creatures were larger and more vicious than the ones his Marines had faced on the harvesting stations. They fought with weapons that fired living projectiles designed to burrow into their target's flesh. "Contacts in Section 7, reported Sergeant Beth Williams over the team communication network. Williams was a combat engineer who had learned her trade during the Martian Tunnel wars where humans had fought each other in conditions that would kill most alien species. She moved through the weapons corridors like a ghost while setting explosive charges on critical systems. The Vorth had built their device with redundancies that would allow it to function even after taking significant damage. Williams had to find and destroy every backup system before the primary charges could be detonated. Meanwhile, Admiral Hayes led her reduced fleet in pursuit of the main Vorth force that was trying to escape toward their empire's core worlds. War Prime Gextar commanded over 2,000 ships and had a significant head start, but he had made the mistake of underestimating human determination and tactical flexibility. Enemy fleet is maintaining formation and heading for the hyperspace jump point, reported Lieutenant Campbell while monitoring long-range sensors. They seem to believe they can outrun us to safety. Hayes smiled with an expression that would have terrified most civilized beings. She had spent 40 years studying every conflict in human history and learning from commanders who had faced impossible odds. The Vorth were about to discover why humans were considered the most dangerous species in known space. Launch all fighters and activate the pursuit protocol, she commanded, while her ships began accelerating beyond their normal safety limits. Every vessel is authorized to use maximum burn rates regardless of engine damage. We are going to catch them before they reach friendly territory. The chase through interstellar space became the stuff of legend among the species that witnessed it. Human ships pushed their engines beyond design specifications while maintaining perfect formation at speeds that should have torn their hulls apart. The Vorth fleet found itself being slowly overtaken by enemies who seemed immune to the normal laws of physics. Elder Morthic watched the human rescue operation from his position in the planetary capital, where Vorth ground forces were using his people as living shields. The old Quillen had lived through 3 centuries of peace and prosperity, but nothing had prepared him for the horror of watching his civilization being systematically destroyed. Why do the humans fight so hard for people they have never met? He asked Ambassador Kethfer, who was coordinating with the rescue teams through hidden communication channels. Because they understand that evil which goes unopposed will eventually spread everywhere, Kethfer replied while watching human shuttles evacuate civilians under heavy enemy fire. They fight for us today so they will not have to fight for themselves. Tomorrow, Commander Turner reached the orbital weapons central control chamber after battling through corridors filled with Vorth defenders who fought with desperate fury. The aliens knew that losing this facility would cripple their harvesting operations throughout the sector. They were willing to die to prevent human saboteurs from reaching their target. The control chamber was a massive spherical room lined with organic computers that pulsed with bioluminescent displays. Turner realized that the entire weapon was partially alive and would try to defend itself even after its crew was eliminated. He would have to destroy the biological components as well as the mechanical systems. Charges set in all primary locations, reported Sergeant Williams as she fought her way toward the evacuation point. We have maybe 10 minutes before the Vorth realize what we have done and try to activate the weapon manually. Turner attached his final explosive device to the weapon's central brain, which was a grotesque fusion of alien technology and harvested biological material. He could see neural tissue from dozens of different species that had been incorporated into the system to increase its processing power. Back in space, Admiral Hayes had finally caught up with the fleeing Vorth fleet in a nebula where normal sensors could not function properly. The environment was filled with charged particles and electromagnetic interference that would disable most electronic systems. It was exactly the kind of place where humans excelled at fighting. All ships switched to backup navigation and prepare for close-quarters combat, she commanded while her fleet dispersed into hunting formation. Show them what Deathworlders do when someone threatens innocent people with torture. The battle in the nebula was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human ships used the environment as camouflage while hunting Vorth vessels through clouds of ionized gas. They fought at ranges where crews could see each other through their viewports and used weapons designed for maximum psychological impact. War Prime Gextar found his flagship surrounded by human vessels that appeared and disappeared in the nebula like vengeful spirits. His crew was paralyzed with terror as they realized they were being hunted by predators who viewed their numerical advantage as merely an inconvenience. "Human Admiral, I offer you terms," he broadcast on all frequencies while his ship took devastating hits from enemies he could not see. "Release my forces and I will provide information about Vorth's strategic capabilities. You could use this knowledge to protect your own worlds." Admiral Hayes considered his offer while watching her tactical displays show the systematic destruction of the enemy fleet. She thought about the billions of beings who had been tortured to death in Vorth harvesting facilities and the civilians who were still dying on the planet below. "The only information I need is how to find the rest of your empire," she replied while signaling her ships to close in for the final attack. "That knowledge will die with you, but the galaxy will be safer for your absence." Commander Turner's explosive charges detonated simultaneously throughout the orbital weapon just as the Vorth tried to activate it in desperation. The massive device tore itself apart in a chain reaction that could be seen from orbit. 20 billion Quillen civilians looked up at the sky and watched their salvation written in fire across the stars. "Weapon destroyed, sir," reported Admiral North over the fleet communication system. "Beginning immediate evacuation of civilian population from planetary surface." The destruction of War Prime Gexstar S fleet was completed within hours as human ships hunted down every vessel that had participated in the harvesting operations. No quarter was given and no prisoners were taken. The message that humanity sent that day would echo throughout the galaxy for generations. Elder Morthic was among the first civilians evacuated from the planet's surface by human rescue teams, who worked with efficiency that amazed even their allies. These same beings who had fought with terrifying fury against their enemies showed infinite compassion for innocent victims. "How can your people be so gentle with us after displaying such violence against our enemies?" he asked Dr. Santos while she treated injured refugees in a human medical ship. "Because we understand the difference between warriors and civilians," she replied while working to save a child who had been injured by Vorth weapons. "Our fury is reserved for those who harm the innocent." The celebration of victory was cut short when intelligence reports arrived from the outer sensor networks. The escaped War Prime Gexstar had successfully transmitted detailed information about human capabilities to the core worlds of the Vorth Empire before his ship was destroyed. "How long until they respond?" Admiral Hayes asked her intelligence officers during the post-battle briefing. Lieutenant Campbell delivered news that chilled everyone in the room to their bones. "Long-range communications indicate that the Vorth supremacy is mobilizing their Grand Fleet, sir. Every ship in their empire is being recalled to prepare for invasion of human space." Admiral Hayes looked out at the stars where somewhere in the darkness the largest military force in galactic history was preparing to destroy her species. The Quillen homeworld was saved, but humanity had painted a target on itself that could not be removed. "How many ships are we facing?" she asked, while already knowing the answer would be beyond anything they had ever prepared for. "Conservative estimates suggest 10,000 vessels, sir," Campbell replied with a voice that barely remained steady. "The entire Vorth Empire is coming for us, *******. 6 months after the liberation of the Quillen homeworld, the largest invasion fleet in galactic history emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Supreme Overlord Krexthal commanded 10,000 Vorth ships in a formation that stretched across space like a metal cancer. He had come to exterminate the Deathworlder threat once and for all. What the Vorth Supreme Overlord found waiting for him was something no intelligence report could have prepared him for. The Sol system had become the rallying point for dozens of alien species who had heard the story of humanity's war against the Harvesters. Ships from across the galaxy floated in defensive formations around Earth. Ambassador David Chun stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Unity as representatives from 40 different worlds debated strategy in the main conference chamber. The soft-spoken man had spent months convincing entire civilizations to risk everything in support of a species most of them had never met. "The Zephyrian Third Fleet has arrived with medical supplies and food for extended siege operations," he reported to Admiral Hayes during their morning coordination meeting. "The Altarian defense?" cores is requesting permission to deploy their gravity mines throughout the outer system. Hayes reviewed the tactical displays that showed allied forces from across the galaxy, taking defensive positions around human worlds. Species that had been enemies for centuries were working together because they finally had a common cause that transcended their ancient grudges: fleet. Admiral Sarah North had been promoted to overall strategic command of the combined forces that now defended human space. The woman who had started her career as a fighter pilot was now responsible for coordinating the largest military alliance in galactic history. "Enemy fleet composition is exactly what our intelligence predicted," she announced during the final command briefing before battle commenced. 10,000 ships, including mobile harvesting platforms and bioweapon deployment systems. They intend to process our entire population while we are still alive. The human response to this threat had taken 6 months of preparation that turned the Sol system itself into the ultimate fortress. Asteroid fields had been converted into weapon platforms, while gas giant storms hid entire fleets waiting to ambush approaching enemies. Even the sun had been turned into a weapon through stellar engineering projects that most species considered impossible. Supreme Overlord Krexthal was larger and more terrifying than any Vorth the humans had previously encountered. His bioship had been grown from the harvested remains of 100 different species and pulsed with organic weapons that could sterilize entire worlds. He opened communications with Earth, expecting to receive the usual surrender offers. "Primitive Deathworlders, you stand before the might of an empire that spans 10,000 worlds," he announced while his fleet moved into attack formation. "Submit to harvesting and your genetic material will serve a purpose greater than your pathetic civilization ever achieved." The response came not from Admiral Hayes or any human commander, but from Elder Morthic of the liberated Quillen Federation. The old alien's voice carried across space on frequencies that reached every ship in both fleets as he delivered a message that would be remembered for millennia. "Supreme Overlord Krexthal, you face not just humanity but every species that refuses to kneel before monsters," he declared while Quillen ships moved to flanking positions around the Vorth formation. "We stand with the Deathworlders because they taught us that freedom is worth any price." The final battle for the future of galactic civilization began when Vorth bioweapons struck the outer planets of the Sol system. These devices were designed to convert living tissue into raw materials while keeping the nervous system intact to maximize processing efficiency. They had never been used against a species that treated biological warfare as simply another battlefield hazard. Human colonies on the outer worlds had been evacuated months earlier while their environments were seeded with counteragents that turned Vorth bioweapons against themselves. The aliens watched in horror as their most feared weapons were neutralized by enemies who understood biological systems better than they did. "Impossible!" Krexthal screamed as reports flooded in from his weapon deployment teams. "No species has ever developed immunity to our harvesting viruses." What the Supreme Overlord did not understand was that humans had been fighting biological threats since before they left their homeworld. Diseases that would exterminate other species were merely inconveniences to beings whose ancestors had survived plagues that killed 90% of their population. The space battle that followed made the previous conflicts look like minor skirmishes. Vorth ships attacked in waves of hundreds, while human and allied vessels used tactics that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Entire formations would disappear into hyperspace only to reappear behind enemy lines moments later. Commander Webb now led a squadron of modified merchant vessels that had been converted into kamikaze platforms. Each ship was loaded with enough explosives to destroy a Vorth cruiser and piloted by volunteers who had no intention of surviving the mission. "Remember, we are not dying today, we are buying time for our children to live tomorrow," he told us. Pilots over their private communication channel. "Make every shot count because the galaxy is watching." Webb's ship punched through the shields of a Vorth biocarrier and detonated inside its central processing chamber. The explosion released thousands of harvested beings who had been kept alive for processing. Many died in the blast, but those who survived were finally free from their nightmare. Dr. Santos worked frantically in the medical stations that had been established throughout the system to treat wounded from dozens of different species. Human military medicine had been designed to keep soldiers fighting under conditions that would kill most other beings. Allied casualties were saved by techniques that seemed like miracles to their own people. "How are they still fighting?" asked a wounded Altarian pilot while Santos treated burns that covered 60% of his body. "I saw their ship take hits that should have destroyed it completely because we learned long ago that giving up means dying," she replied while preparing surgical instruments that had been designed for battlefield conditions. "On our homeworld, everything tries to kill you, so we developed medicine that works even when everything else fails." The turning point of the battle came when Supreme Overlord Krexthel made the mistake of challenging Admiral Hayes to single combat. The Vorth leader believed that eliminating the human commander would demoralize their forces and lead to quick victory. He had no understanding of how Deathworlders actually fought. "Your species amuses me with its primitive concepts of honor," he broadcast while his massive bioship approached the human flagship. "I will harvest your brain personally and use your memories to understand how to break your people's will to resist." Admiral Hayes accepted the challenge not because she believed in honor, but because she understood that some enemies could only be defeated through personal confrontation. Her ship, the Retribution, was half the size of Krexthel's vessel, but it had been built by a species that viewed impossible odds as merely another engineering problem to solve. The duel between the two flagships took place in the space between Earth and Mars, while both fleets watched their commanders fight for the future of their species. Krexthel's bioship attacked with weapons that were grown from harvested neural tissue and designed to cause maximum psychological trauma. Hayes responded with tactics that no civilized species would consider using. She rammed her ship into the enemy vessel, then teleported boarding parties directly into its central nervous system. Human Marines fought their way through corridors that were literally alive while the ship tried to digest them with its own immune system. The biological systems that made Krexthel's ship so powerful became its weakness when faced with enemies who understood that living weapons could be killed like any other organism. Human soldiers used viral agents and biological warfare techniques that turned the ship's own biology against itself. "This is impossible," Krexthel screamed as his flagship began to consume itself from within. "No species fights by poisoning their enemy's biology while standing inside the same organism. You obviously never met anyone from a death world," Admiral Hayes replied while her Marines fought their way toward the Supreme Overlord's command chamber. "We have been fighting biological systems that wanted to kill us since before we learned to make fire." The destruction of Krexthel's flagship sent shockwaves through the Vorth Empire that reached their homeworlds within hours. For the first time in their history, the Supreme Overlord had been defeated in personal combat by creatures they had dismissed as primitive animals, but the real victory came from what happened next. Instead of simply destroying the Vorth fleet, Admiral Hayes offered terms that no one had expected. The surviving enemy ships would be allowed to return home with a message for their entire empire. "Tell your people that the harvesting ends now," she broadcast on all frequencies while her fleet held the demoralized Vorth forces at weapons range. "Any ship caught processing sentient beings will be hunted down and destroyed. Any world that participates in genocide will be liberated by force." The Vorth Empire's response was immediate and complete. Within days, planets throughout their territory began releasing harvested prisoners and dismantling processing facilities. Species that had been enslaved for centuries found themselves suddenly free as their captors fled rather than face human retaliation. Ambassador Chun worked with representatives from dozens of liberated worlds to establish new governments and trade relationships. The galactic balance of power had shifted permanently as species that had been victims became allies of the beings who had saved them. "How do we thank a species that asks for nothing in return for saving our entire civilization?" asked Elder Morthic during a ceremony honoring human sacrifices in the war. "By making sure this never happens again," replied Commander Webb, who had survived his kamikaze mission after his navigation systems malfunctioned and forced him to crash land instead of exploding. The galaxy is full of predators, but now they know that the prey has guardians. The war's end brought unexpected changes throughout known space. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Vorth Empire opened to free commerce, while species that had hidden from galactic civilization for centuries emerged to join the growing alliance of free worlds. Fleet Admiral North established the Galactic Protection Service with headquarters in the Sol system and bases throughout human space. The organization's mission was simple: respond to any species that called for help against genocide or systematic oppression. "We are not conquerors," she announced during the service's founding ceremony. "We are the people you call when someone needs to learn that mercy has teeth, Doctor." Santos opened medical schools on a dozen worlds to train alien physicians in human battlefield medicine. The techniques that had been developed to keep soldiers fighting on Deathworlds proved invaluable for treating injuries that would be fatal using conventional galactic medical practices. 5 years after the Vorth War ended, Commander Webb received another distress signal at the monitoring station near Jupiter. This time the call came from the Spiral Arm, where a species called the Carrion Collective was harvesting the neural patterns of other beings to create artificial intelligence systems. Webb looked at the message while sipping his morning coffee and smiled with the same expression his ancestors had worn when they first picked up sharp sticks to defend their caves. Some things never changed, no matter how far humanity traveled among the stars. "Signal Admiral Hayes," he told his communications officer while activating the protocols that would summon the largest fleet in human space. "Tell her we have another SOS from people who need to learn what happens when you threaten innocent beings." The galaxy had learned that when someone called for help, humanity did not just send ships. They sent a fleet of fury piloted by Deathworlders, who had turned protecting the innocent into their species' primary export. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, new monsters were about to discover why even pirates avoided human space. The Deathworlders had answered another call, and hell was coming with them.